The top Mythic Plus specs in 10.1.5 may surprise you in today's ranking because looking at how things shifted, we will give you the ultimate tier list so you can more accurately see where your spec is, because some specs have went up and some specs have worn down, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, just play for fun, because we're just looking to slam and roast specs that are not that good with augmentation. One such spec is Frost DK. Unfortunately, Frost DK is still pretty much the same as last time. Last time we had it in B tier. Middle of the B tier last time. I'm not sure if it's going to receive any new changes without any new buffs. It's probably going to stay the same. It's a Death Knight. It does have a lot of damage. It's really accessible. It's awesome that people today can essentially play both Breath of Sindragosa and Obliteration and have fun in dungeons. And DK is, at the end of the day, still a pretty tanky spec, and that's something good that you can enjoy since dying kind of sucks. And I would know because I die when I play Feral, since the kitty is a lot squishier than a DK, and it doesn't feel very well. But luckily, I know why I die, because, well, I'm using the Outplayed app, which is sponsoring this video. Thank you very much, Outplayed. And it has a neat little replay function that you can access while the app is running in the background. If something happens, you just press your replay hotkey, which for me is Control F3, and it records the past 30 seconds. You can, change the duration and all of that. And you can essentially see, oh, I died now. Replay, quick, pop it up and see, oh, I pulled aggro off of the mobs because I couldn't wait for the tank to build enough aggro. Maybe the tank was supposed to build aggro a little bit quicker. Either way, I found out why I died, hence I can be more careful and improve as a player. And you can improve as well with Outplayed by just using all of its cool features. Super simple, easy, and free to use. And you can get it really quick by clicking down the link in the description, while also supporting the Marcelian Online channel. But with that out of the way, Unholy DK is unfortunately a sadder story than Frost DK. It's currently C tier. I don't know if last time we had it in D. It might have still been in C. It's fine. Listen. All of these specs are essentially clearing 25, 26 and higher, some of them reaching the plus 30s right now. Obviously, that's not Unholy DK, but Unholy DK is not a bad spec at the end. It's obviously a little bit weaker than Frost DK. It's mostly probably to do with just how it's scaling with the power that it's getting in 10.1.5. It doesn't seem to push keys higher than what we've seen last time, so I guess that's where Unholy is, and hopefully we'll see some love in the future. Love that we, I think, kind of seen with Havoc, although things didn't really change a lot with Havoc. Last time we had it, I think, bottom B tier, and now it's getting close to A tier. It's definitely in front of Frost DK, and is doing pretty good keys, surprisingly, even though I think on Warcraft logs, Havoc is ranked pretty low. I have a feeling that a lot of the big parses and a lot of the big IO players that play Havoc are just a couple of them that are really pulling the spec off. Just to point out that the spec does have potential to do higher and higher keys, but it's probably going to struggle more so than other spec that we might see in B tier and definitely in A tier, which is Balanced Druid, the chicken. Haha, Marcel, you're not here to criticize my chicken, man. Cluck, cluck. I am happy because Balanced Druid is still doing pretty good. It's still A tier. I don't know if it's top A tier. I think last time we had it as the best, close to being S tier. Now it's not as close to being S tier. The S tier specs, which we will get to in a second, keep going higher and higher and higher as opposed to every other spec. I think it's just because of how they synergize. But speaking of Balanced Druid, it's still solid. It has really good AoE. It has decent single target. It's a Druid. It gives you all the Druidy goodness. But you're probably going to get most of those out of Bears, because Bears just melt. But this is a DPS tier list, and Balanced Druid is A tier. Pretty good. Play it. It's a lot of fun. Feral, the kitty, also is not doing too shabby. I think it's I think we still had it in B tier last time. Similar to Frost DK, it's doing fine. It's, middle of the curve. It's, average, but it's doing a lot better than a lot of people definitely point out. And there's a lot of discrimination towards kitties. Obviously, the big competitor being Balanced Druid is out there. It's pretty obvious, but it's not as bad as we had it in the past seasons in C tier and D tier and stuff like that. So Feral is good. Do it. A controversial spec to rank is Devastation, which, depending on where you look, Devastation has taken a dip ever since Augmentation has released, for obvious reasons. Augmentation is just a superior spec. Devastation can still do good damage and it definitely can push keys. I think it's just not that popular anymore because not a lot of people play it. It's a B tier spec. I think it's ahead of Frost DK, surprisingly. There are not that many people pushing really high with Devastation because if you even look at the logs, damage numbers aside, most of the specs that are pushing the highest of keys, 26, 27s, 28s, are always going to be running an augmentation. And if you're going to be looking at the top Devastation keys, you're probably going to see an augmentation there as well. So there's kind of diminishing returns for the Evoker class and the drag tier raise that you can bring to your party, which is, you know, probably not why you're going to see it very high, but it does have the potential, which is why it is in B tier. Although, if we look at other data and the overall popularity across the board, we would probably rank it C tier-ish. Moving down to Beast Mastery, actually not down, but let's say across, because Beast Mastery is still solid. We will see a lot of the specs today, not really seeing much change, although a couple really jumped a few tiers, but Beast Mastery is still pretty solid. It brings all the Hunter goodness. I think it's still probably one of the best Hunter specs in terms of overall reach. Sure, Survival seemingly might do a little bit more damage and higher keys, but not by much. But, you know, BM at the end of the day does bring range, which is a lot safer than melee. Not unlike the Marksmanship spec, which is still dog poop. Marksmanship has seen 0 changes, and since it was bottom of the tier last time, it's bottom of the tier this time, and it's looking like it's bottom of the tier for the foreseeable future since nothing has been announced for Marksmanship whatsoever. I don't know why. It was pretty good last patch, and it's still very mediocre right now. It's still doing decent keys. I think it's 24s, 25s. I think I've seen something like this, but you would probably be safe to assume that a lot of people that are playing Marksmanship are just playing BM, or that could play Marksmanship rather, are just playing BM and Survival. Speaking of Survival, it is doing slightly better than BM. It's, I would say, let's put it in front of the kitty. It has good damage. It has the Hunter utility kit. A little harder to pull off because you're a melee. You don't have the coverage of the combat as much as the BM Hunter, but the extra damage definitely helps. The fact that it has a shorter kick definitely helps because, you know, if we're talking about what it brings extra as opposed to BM, it's probably that. And it's a melee spec. Melee is a lot safer to play nowadays, but that's usually compared to normal range, not Beastmaster Hunter. Although all said and done, Survival is decent. Arcane was a tricky spec to rank because it's doing slightly worse than last time we've seen it, but there are a couple of top Arcane players that are really kicking ass and taking names, and this is why it's still in the B tier. It's bottom B tier. It's close to getting into C, so I don't see the future for Arcane being too bright, considering that it's doing a little less good than last time that we ranked it. It's still okay. The changes that it got in 10.1.5 definitely make people a lot more happy to play with Arcane, but in terms of the actual numbers, because I think at the end of the day that's what really matters, didn't seem to influence it that much, or it could just be just a weird scaling with augmentation where Fire, which is next, just gets more juice, and it gets so much juice, it's S tier, baby. No surprises here. The S tier spec is still Fire and 2 other, we'll get to it eventually. All of the top keys, the plus 29s and 30s right now, and possibly 31s that maybe we cannot see yet in logs and such, are definitely cleared with Fire Mage. Actually, it's a very consistent team, and we'll get to that as well. Probably not very surprising, but Fire Mage is still very good. It definitely scales well with all of the top buffers in the game, the Shadow Priests, the Priests in general, and the Augmentation for sure. Banzai for Fire Mage, you guys should be happy. Frost Mage also was a very interesting surprise. Similar to Arcane, there are just a handful of Frost Mages that are crushing high keys. Obviously, it doesn't do as much damage as Fire, and it doesn't do as much damage as other specs, but it is a mage, and if you cannot stand Fire, you can take your Frost Mage all the way into A tier, baby, because it is clearing very high keys. Some of the top Frost Mages do have a lot of score. Now, I don't know if they got there because of Fire and they're just clearing some high keys as Frost for the score and for the rankings. It could be that, but at the end of the day, they are in the keys, so we cannot know for sure if they're essentially carried or if they used Fire to, you know, get 80-90% of their IO and then they just use Frost to clear 1 key higher to get the rankings there. Then, I mean, I cannot help you with that. It is what it is. But Frost is A tier from all intents and purposes, a little bit lower down the food chain when it comes to A tier, but A tier nonetheless. Windwalker Monk, similar story, which is very consistent across B tier. It is okay. Didn't really get any changes whatsoever. It doesn't scale particularly amazing with endgame buffers like Priest and Augmentation, so is what it is. It's still a good spec. It has really good monk utility, and you're likely going to see Windwalkers before Brewmasters, maybe. If you need Mystic Touch, if you need Ring of Peace or anything like that, you can easily get your Windwalker juice right out of the horse's mouth. Listen, I don't know what I'm saying. But Ret is also good. I mean, I think last time we still had it in B tier. Now it's still B tier. It's leading the pack with the B tier. It was very close to getting it. No, I think last time we did have it in A tier. So actually, Ret did drop because it was a little bit hard to find its place between B and A, but there's quite a bit of a difference between what Ret is doing now and what it was doing 2-3 weeks ago when we first ranked it. So that's how it is. Marcelian called it. Usually Reds don't, even in this iteration, don't scale that well, specifically now since it doesn't value haste as much. And we're getting to another usual suspect, which is Shadow Priest, which is top of the S tier. Like, I don't know why. Listen, the top teams that are clearing the very top keys have a Shadow Priest and a Fire Mage, and obviously Augmentation. We'll get to that as well. Blah, blah, blah. But for some reason, the top Shadow Priests have slightly higher IO. There are more people clearing high keys with Shadow Priest than with Fire, because obviously the top 10, top 20 keys are the same, but going towards the medium parts, there's probably more Shadow Priests. It's overall better than Fire Mage because it does have more applications to its Power Infusion than Fire Mage just sucking up Power Infusion. So that's kind of how it is. It's a really good time for Shadow Priest even after the nerf. So S tier, baby. Not S tier is Assassination, which I'm gonna rip the band-aid off really quick. It is the bottom of the bottomest. The rework cannot come in faster, and I don't know if it's confirmed or not, but it's likely going to come out in 10.2, so there's still a little while to go. Assassination just doesn't have its kit well-rounded and designed for Mythic Plus. Sure, it can do some damage. Sure, it's clearing decent keys. It's not that bad. I think it's 25s, maybe even 26s, maybe one or two. So it's not that bad. It's higher keys than pretty much you and me have ever done in our entire life. But it's definitely behind the other specs by quite a bit, obviously seen from our ranking as well. But you can look at any other rankings and make up your mind for yourself. Similar-ish, but not really. Outlaw has taken a dip from last time we've seen it. It's down to C tier. Its highest keys are about 25s and maybe 26s, similar to Assassination, but it's doing a little bit better across the board. Outlaw hasn't really changed that much. It's still decent and solid. It's just probably the fact that a lot more people play Subtlety, and Subtlety has taken a rise from last time, top of the A tier. It used to be the king in S tier, but now that's being dominated by spellcasters. However, Subtlety is still retaining its throne of the best melee in the game currently. If you wanted a confirmation for that, then stamp of approval, Marcelian Online. Subtlety is the best melee in the game. You can tell your friends and guildmaster that we said so. Play Subtlety, it's really good. Plus, it is actually performing really well. It's doing blast, massive amounts of damage. It still retains decent to high single target damage as opposed to something like Balanced Druid, which you can have massive single target, but actually no, we can have massive AoE. What am I talking about? But the single target will probably take a little bit of a dip for Boomy as opposed to Subtlety, which is still kicking across the board. Elemental Shaman also is still a solid A tier spec. It's bottom of the A tier, right there with Frost Mage. It's a similar story where some of the top Elemental Shamans are definitely crushing some of the higher keys, 28s, I think, maybe 29s as well. Probably not yet 29s if I recall correctly, but Elemental is definitely doing a lot better. Not across the board. There are players who are still struggling keeping this spec up because, to be fair, it's not a particularly easy spec to play, and it does have a lot of things that you need to juggle. So that's, at the end of the day, that's essentially Elemental. But it is the Shaman spec. It does have builds that you can play with, and you can have fun with it. It's a fun spec. Does really well. Elemental Shaman Enhancement also in A tier, a little bit behind Boomy actually, because there's quite a difference between Enhancement and Subtlety. At the very least, they're still the top melee specs in the game. They're doing really well. Enhancement is still fairly solid, even after the nerfs, which have been quite a while ago. Is still pushing really well. Obviously, the top keys are clear with augmentations in the group, so it's kind of hard to judge Enhancement in a vacuum. to be fair, it's pretty hard to judge any spec in a vacuum nowadays with augmentation, but we do what we can here when we analyze data, because that's what everything is based on. And Affliction, I had higher hopes for Affliction. It's down to C tier now. Obviously still clearing decent keys. C and B tier are usually clearing 25s, 24s, stuff like that, with plus minus a key here and there. But Affliction is definitely more fun to play. It's definitely a better experience overall in Mythic Plus, but the numbers are just not there. And that's not true just for Affliction, but for the rest of the Warlock specs as well. Demonology is also a little bit... Actually, Affliction is better than Unholy. Demonology is also struggling a little bit. It's still a good spec. I mean, it hasn't really been nerfed. It had some changes going into 10.1.5 in terms of the talents, but overall the spec is definitely pumping. However, although most of the specs that are really doing amazing are definitely beneficiaries of Power Infusion and Augmentation as well, Demonology is probably one of the specs that needs Power Infusion to actually really function. Like, a lot of specs get a lot of benefits from Power Infusion, but very few specs, maybe Fire Mage can be an exception, can get as much power from Power Infusion. And not only that, even without Power Infusion, it loses a lot more than, let's say, Fire Mage would lose. So it's clear in its positioning. It's C tier. It dropped a lot over the course of this season. Still a fun spec to play, still doing pretty well, but not as well as Destruction, which surprisingly, I think last time we had it in B tier. Now it's starting to really crush. It's top of the A tier, surprisingly, because Destruction has had a rough start in 10.1.5. It's doing really well. Obviously, it's one of the specs that scale the best, and probably people are figuring out how it actually fits in the meta and how it would fit in a party with Augmentation, because at the end of the day, whatever we're talking about here in this tier list is with Augmentation in mind. Similar to Destruction, Arms Warrior has climbed quite high, actually right behind it, right in his butt. You can smell the butt of Destruction. I don't know why I said that, but now that image is in your mind, and Arms is doing really well. It's a good warrior spec. It slaps. It's A tier. I mean, A tier is pretty good. I'm gonna lie. Definitely has its unique place in the meta. It can do things that no other spec can. Well, maybe Ret can do, like, you know, the taunt from your tank to drop specs, to drop stacks, to drop... You don't drop specs, you drop stacks, and you pop die by the sword to not die. And Fury Warrior is not far off. It's actually doing a little bit better than Arms. It's up there next with Enhancement. It's crushing higher keys. It's doing decent amount of damage. It's more simplistic, less conditions to get your damage out. And I don't know if you provide as much utility to the party. I guess you do. Rallying Cry is pretty much the same across the board. And last but not least, the one that changed everything, Augmentation. No surprise to anybody. Top of the S tier spec. With the trio, the triage, the triune, the trifecta, Shadow Priest, Fire Mage, and Augmentation is what you're going to see from all of the top key pushers. It's just the combo. It's the thing to do. It just scales so well into high keys, and Augmentation has been seeing more and more play, and I think it's doing, obviously it's doing a little bit better than last time we've seen it, because people have had time to play with it, but it's still in the same configuration. The best supporters for Fire Mage, Shadow Priest, and Augmentation. And Augmentation, with all of its damage contribution, depending on how you look at the data, because Warcraft Logs, for instance, I think it's calculating all the damage that Augmentation is giving the other specs into its own damage, and if you take that as a way of the way the spec plays, it does a lot of damage. But I don't think that's happening for Power Infusion, for instance, because we would see Shadow Priest destroy everybody else. And looking at the tier list, you might be upset that maybe your spec isn't there, or you're looking at some A and S tier and thinking, man, I'm just not doing as much damage, I need to improve. Well, you can use Outplay to actually analyze your replays and be a better player overall. Thank you, Outplay, for sponsoring the video once away. And not only that, you can still improve your overall gameplay experience by checking this video out, where we cover 5 of the best things that you can use to have a much more pleasant, fun, and enjoyable experience when playing World of Warcraft.